Well, afternoon, everyone. Almost afternoon. I'm meteorologist Chesley McNeil. As of the 11 o'clock update, we had a fresh update in to update you on Ian, the hurricane, starting to intensify just a little bit. So that's one of the changes, starting to become a little bit stronger now. Also a little bit more forward speed as well as the storm continues to head toward the Gulf. Right now, still in the Caribbean Ocean, as you can see, headed toward Cuba, mainly affecting the Cayman Islands right now with the very heavy rain, the winds that is associated with it. We'll zoom in here a little bit and you can see we don't have a defined eye, but you can see the counterclockwise circulation around the area of low pressure. Not well defined, but it's still there. We do have the area of circulation there, a little center trying to form there. As the storm starts to intensify a bit, we'll really start to see that defined eye. Now, let's continue to slide further off to the north and moving toward the western end of Cuba. It should pass over Cuba likely later tonight into tomorrow morning, possibly as a Category 2 hurricane by then, maybe even a Category 3, depending on how quickly it starts to move further off to the north. So it's something that we've been watching. Let me get the latest track on here right now. The latest information shows us now those winds are up to about 80 miles per hour. That's a 5-mile-an-hour change from the last update we've had. You can still see the hurricane warnings. This color in red, that's for all of western Cuba right there. The blue that's adjacent to that is tropical storm warnings. We have that also for the Florida Keys as well. You can also see the tropical storm warnings that are in effect for the west coast of Florida, southern Florida there, and also for the western Cayman Islands there as well. Now, it is a Category 1 hurricane. Again, moving to the north at 13 miles per hour. We'll continue to track to the north. Now, this particular track, this latest update, shows it becoming a Category 2 hurricane before making landfall later on tonight into tomorrow morning. Then will intensify once it gets into the Gulf or those very warm waters to a Category 4 hurricane, meaning that it have winds up to about 140 miles per hour. As it gets closer to the coast, the Florida coast, west coast there, expecting it to weaken just a little bit there. We'll have some interaction with the coastline there before making landfall, and that landfall can be anywhere between Tampa, Florida and Big Bend, as you can see, where I'd even say over toward Panama City. If you look at the top part of the cone of uncertainty, you notice how tight it is as it makes its way toward Florida, but once we get up that way, it starts to fan out a little bit, and that's where the models start to differentiate a little bit. Some have it going a little bit further to the west, some have it a little bit further over toward the east. Now, this will be by Wednesday that we're expecting the storm to make landfall on Wednesday. We'll say Wednesday, between Wednesday late and Thursday right now. Again, it could speed up, could slow down, something to have to watch out for. But once it makes landfall, we'll start to diminish, become a tropical storm, then a tropical depression. You can see up closer to central Georgia, down to a tropical depression, and that will be on Saturday, or at least by Saturday morning on its current trajectory. And notice, very important, with that center of the cone of uncertainty, you have it right there to the east, more to the east of our state, which would bode well for North Georgia. Now, with the cone of uncertainty, you got to look at the far ends of it, and that means that the storm could veer more to the right, which means it would keep it closer to the coastline, or to the left or west would keep it closer to Alabama. If it moves closer to Alabama, that means worse conditions for us as far as the winds go. Again, on the right side of this area of low pressure is where you have the heaviest winds, the heaviest rain as well. The onshore or coming in flow is what we'd see there. On the left side, if you will, let's say closer to Alabama, that's where we would have the weak side, so the return flow. So if it stays on this particular track, it would be better for the city of Atlanta, at least. Of course, you would get some devastation taking place down there toward Florida, obviously with the storm moving right along the coastline there. So from Tampa all the way up, you're really talking about a lot of that onshore flow where the strongest winds will be associated with the storm. And so even though it wouldn't make a direct landfall, for example, over toward Tampa, you're still talking about a lot of rain and a lot of wind, certainly would lead to flooding for those guys. For us, we're talking about winds on the lighter side and rain from the storm, maybe up to about 2 inches, certainly possible. Now, because this is so far out, the trajectory could change. And so that's why we're watching it. That's why we're keeping you updated, because it's days away from us. Today is only Monday. We're not expecting to see any of the impacts here, at least until about Friday night going into Saturday. Now it'll move into southern Georgia by the time we get to Friday. We'll say Friday early morning, and then making its way further off to the north, and expecting that to slow down just a bit as it begins to move in. And so if you look at these models, this is what I was talking about. See how tight those models are as it moves over toward Cuba? Very tight. much consistency there with the models, and so it's likely that that will be the path. Now, once we get to about Thursday, notice how they begin to fan out a little bit. Once it starts to get a little bit closer to the coastline there of Florida, it starts to fan out a little bit. So either anyway over toward the west, over toward the Panhandle, or as far east going into Tampa and then up toward Jacksonville and over toward the east. And so that's why we watch these models very closely. In the coming days, they also will get a little tighter, and we'll get a better grip on exactly the path that we think this storm will begin to take. Here's another model that we look at. In fact, the two that we kind of judge this by, one is called the American model, which would be in the green, and then the pink. I want to run this back a little bit just to show you what we're looking at. First of all, looking at this particular model, looking at this particular map here, the two models are in agreement on the path, one right on top of the other. And you can see how as the storm begins to move over toward Cuba, it's category 2 possibly by then. And then once it gets into the Gulf, notice how tight those lines become. That area of low pressure really starts to intensify a bit. And so that's where we think it will begin to become a category 4 hurricane. Both models agree in the positioning of this storm as we continue to slide up. Now we're by Wednesday morning, right adjacent or along the west coast of Florida. As it continues to push further off to the north, it will have some interaction with the coastline there, so expect it to begin to weaken somewhat. You'll watch those lines begin to spread out a little bit now as we head into Thursday, Friday, still out to sea, but those lines really start to spread out. So that's where you'll start to see, if it stays on this particular path, those some weakening of the storm that will begin to take place before it makes landfall. Then it starts to move up. Now here, at this particular point, once we get to Friday evening, this is where the models are going to start to diverge just a little bit. You're going to find where, for example, the green or the American model stays down to the south. It's that area of low pressure, the very small circle there that's over toward the Jacksonville area starts to go toward the east. Meanwhile, the pink circle starts to go back off to the west. And so that's where the models begin to vary just a little bit, where they begin to separate. And so we really want those to be a little bit more in line for us to look at. Because the more they're in line, the more we're certain of the particular path. For example, when we go back out, you can see where they're in line, right on top of one another as the storm begins to make its way up to the north. But then before or after it makes landfall, that's where they start to diverge and begin to go, one going to the east and one going to the west. And this is very important for our forecast, because that east or west track really will determine what type of winds we'll see, and also what type of precipitation or how much precipitation we'll see as well. This is a wind probability map, just one that we're looking at, and you can see where the winds are very intense right near the center of circulation as it begins to make its way onshore. The probability for strong winds over 30 miles per hour, tropical storm winds, can be found right along the coastline as it moves inland, and then they start to diminish as you move further off to the north. And so you can see the probability with this particular trek by Saturday over us has a low probability for winds at 30 miles per hour plus. The very high threat for that would be down to the south of us and then over toward the east. And so that's the winds. We look at two models. Here's the American model when it comes to the rainfall, all right? And you'll notice if you look at North Georgia, you talk about lighter amounts. Most of the heavier amounts will be down to the south of us, where the storm makes landfall and then moves to the north, and then over toward the east of us. That's where, if it's to the right of the storm, that's where you got the most onshore flow. And so that's where you see the heaviest amounts. Say, for example, in Atlanta, you're looking at maybe an inch and a half of rainfall if it stays on this particular track. Let's look at our European model. Now, the European model, again, once it makes landfall, begins to verge to the west a little bit, and you can see where the heavier rain is now over the metro area and northward. And so that's the difference between the trek of this particular storm. As it begins to push inland, where will it go? Will it move more mainly over toward the east, or will it move over toward the west? That's going to be the question that we're following, especially as we get closer to the weekend, because that's going to determine, again, our impacts. Impacts meaning that if we talk about those heavy winds, you're talking about downed trees and power outages. If you're talking about just rain or just the rainfall with the light winds, then we can probably sustain that, and most of the heavy amounts of rain and wind would be well to the east of our forecast area. So again, that's what we're watching for. Here's what you need to know about Ian right now. It is expected to become a major hurricane, and that could possibly happen later on tonight before it moves into Cuba. At least a category 2 is being forecast for that particular area. Once it moves past that peninsula, or over that peninsula and jumps into the Gulf, that's when we're expecting it to become a major hurricane. Could be up to a Category 4 hurricane, which means you're talking about major impacts, especially along the west coast of Florida, which includes the Tampa area, because even if the storm doesn't make landfall near Tampa, if it runs along Tampa, that's where you're going to get the brunt of the strongest winds and also the rain as the storm continues to push up to the north. Now, we'll continue to push up to the north, make landfall. Timing right now looks to be by about Thursday going into Friday, and then that will push further off to the north. We could see the impacts here. Now, South Georgia by Friday, but here in the metro area, North Georgia, you're talking late Friday going into Saturday. That's the time frame right now that we're looking at with this particular system as it continues to push further again to the north. We'll see it again late Friday going into Saturday. Now, can the storm speed up? Absolutely it could, which is why we're going to stay on top of this and keep you updated pretty much all week long. On every update that comes out, we're going to give you a fresh look at it. As far as our forecast goes, until then, we are fine, folks. Our forecast track model shows that there's not much going on over us other than the sunshine. In fact, our temperatures will be quite comfortable over the next couple of days. You're looking at temperatures today up to 81. Full sunshine around. Will stay that way as we head into Tuesday, mostly sunny skies. Now you'll notice some of those outer bands, even by Wednesday morning, starting to reach into northern parts of Florida, over toward the Jacksonville area. And because it's on this more of an easterly track, you can see where the heaviest rain stays over toward the east. On the back side of that, there's not much going on at all, and that will continue to be the case as it begins to push further off to the north. And you can see some of that heavy rain now affecting north central portions of Florida. And as it begins to push to the north, most of that heavy rain would stay over toward the east if it stayed on this particular track. So again, that can change. And we've seen that over the years with storms that have pushed into our forecast area where the trajectory begins to change. Really has to do with the upper winds and how the storm is steered, where it will be going. Right now, it looks like more of an easterly track for us, but we'll keep you updated on that. Either way, we expect to see some of those impacts, or could feel some of those impacts by the time we get to the weekend. That's when we'll be looking at the storm in our vicinity, we'll say, again, pushing into the southern portions of the state first and then making its way further off to the north. And keep in mind, when a hurricane makes landfall, for example, it really starts to lose a lot of its strength. It really starts to lose a lot of its characteristics as well. Here's one more time, and look at the track. This is as of the 11 o'clock a.m. hour, so came out just about 13 minutes ago. It has the storm making landfall as a Category 2 over toward Cuba, but that peninsula is not going to have much of an effect on the storm, because once it moves back over the warm waters of the Gulf, that's where we're expecting it to intensify once again. When you see winds, the sustained winds up to 140 miles per hour, that means the gusts could be in the 160, 70, or 80 mile per hour range. It starts to lose a little strength as it moves closer to the coastline, the west coast of Florida, but you're still talking about a powerful hurricane or powerful system. And again, keep in mind, to the right of that, along that coast is where we're going to get the brunt of the onshore flow. The strongest winds will be on that side as well. So even if it doesn't make a landfall over the Tampa area, they still will be going through a lot of that heavy rain. Flooding will be taking place in that heavy wind as well. Of course, Florida is built for those winds, those tropical force winds, but still could do a lot of damage in that particular area. Notice how the storm begins to push further off to the north. And again, the center of this cone of uncertainty keeps it just to the east of our particular area. But if you look at the white lines, that is the cone of uncertainty, the storm has the potential to push to the far west or far east of that. Of course, the farther east it goes, the better off our conditions here in North Georgia will be. And so, again, we'll keep you updated on this, but as of the 11 a.m. hour, storm having winds up to 80 miles per hour, gusts as high as 100 miles per hour, and moving to the northwest at about 13 miles per hour, folks. We're going to continue to keep you updated right here. 11live.com will have everything for you, folks. Every time a new update comes out, we are going to post a new video